Hi, this is Nick Lydorf, and this is my newsletter for Monday, November 30th, 2020. Most important things to take away from this is if you are getting a divorce and you are remarrying, it's really important that you kind of review your estate plan to make sure that there are not any unintended consequences that could happen from you getting a divorce. And this article kind of talks about some of those unintended consequences and things that you might not think could happen when you get remarried or get a divorce. So really important for things like life insurance policies and bank accounts that after you get a divorce, you want to make sure that you update. And if you don't want your former spouse to maybe get life insurance proceeds and things like that, which you may not because you're getting a divorce from them, you need to make sure that you change those beneficiaries immediately because you never know what's going to happen. So first part of this article kind of just talks about how the age of people is and how divorce is becoming much more common with people as they get older. This first scenario talks about one in which you could actually disinherit your children from a previous marriage if you don't pay attention to your previous estate plan. So here, John has two adult children, David and Alexis, from a prior marriage. He marries Moira, who has one adult child, Patrick. And so they're a blended family and they get along well. And he trusts that Moira will take care of his children when John dies. And John estate's plan leaves everything to Moira. So then just after 2 years after being married, John dies suddenly of a heart attack, and he leaves $1.4 million in assets directly to Moira. So Moira is distraught, and although she planned to update her own plan to include David and Alexis, which were John's children, she never got around to doing it and dies just a year after John. Then after her death, all of the assets that she brought in the marriage, along with all of John's assets that she received after John died, passes to Moira's son, Patrick, and David and Alexis get nothing. So I think that's definitely something John would have wanted to avoid. So by failing to update his estate plan to ensure that David and Alexis are taken care of, John left the responsibility for what happened to his assets entirely to his new wife, Moira. And then either intentionally or accidentally, Moira failed to update her estate plan and kind of creates this scenario where David and Alexis don't receive anything, and they were John's children, and I think John would probably want something to happen. The unfortunate thing with this scenario is this is exactly what the documents say that should happen. They just didn't have someone look through them or advise them to update these things as they were had life events and things change and transpire. So it's important to kind of pay attention to these things so you kind of avoid these unintended consequences. So scenario number 2 is where you accidentally disinherit your spouse. So Mark married to Gwen for 30 years. They had 3 children together, and all those kids are now adults. The kids were young. Mark and Gwen both created wills, which they named each other as their sole beneficiaries. When they were both in their 50s and the kids had grown, Bob and Gwen divorced. So then several years later, at age 60, Bob remarries Veronica, a widow with no children, and Bob was very healthy, so he didn't make it a priority to update his estate plan. But within a year of his new marriage, Bob dies suddenly in a car accident. So because Bob died without updating his estate plan, you go back to what he had in writing. So Bob's estate plan, which was written several decades ago, left all of his assets to his ex-wife, Gwen, or if she's not living at the time of his death, to his children. So state law presumes that Gwen has predeceased Bob because they divorced after the will was enacted. So all of Bob's assets, including the house that he and Veronica were living in, passed to his children. Veronica really receives nothing and is forced out of her home when Bob's children sell it. So just kind of, again, it highlights the importance of kind of reviewing your estate plan after major life events like a divorce or remarriage. Final scenario is allowing assets to become depleted. So Steve is a divorcee in his early 60s with 2 adult children when he marries Susan. So Steve has an estate around $850,000, and he's told his kids that after he passes away, he hopes they will use the money that's left to fund college accounts for their own children. But he also wants to ensure that Susan is taken care of, so he establishes a living trust, which he leaves all of his assets to Susan, and upon her death, the remainder of his 2 children. Soon after Steve's dies, Susan has a stroke. She has and requires around-the-clock care for several decades, which is paid for by Steve's trust. When she passes away, the trust has been almost depleted, and Steve's kids inherit virtually nothing. So what you wanted to do there is help them avoid that situation. So Steve could have created in his living, put some provisions in his living trust that certain portion of the assets must go to his children upon his death, the remainder of it passed to Susan. It would have avoided that whole situation where Susan gets all of those assets outright, and when she has a incapacity situation or needs long-term care, then those assets are not eaten away by that long-term care. They could have actually went to where Steve wanted to, which would have been in the children. So thanks for watching this, and you can also sign up for my newsletter. You can get a hold of me at nick@yourestateplanningLawyer.com, and I'm glad to talk with you. You can also give me a call at 517-388-6800, 517-388-6800. Thanks a lot.